The scorching Afghan sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty military outpost as Marine Sergeant Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his brow. It was another typical day at Forward Operating Base Thunder, where temperatures soared above 110 degrees and danger lurked around every corner. Jake had been deployed for 8 months, and the harsh reality of war had become his daily companion. As he walked toward the mess tent for his evening meal, something unusual caught his attention. A small golden-brown dog was limping toward the base perimeter, moving with obvious difficulty. What made Jake stop in his tracks wasn't just the sight of the stray dog, which were common in the area, but what she was carrying in her mouth. The dog held a tiny, motionless puppy between her teeth, carrying it with the gentle care only a mother could possess. Her ribs showed through her matted fur, and her eyes held a desperate plea that transcended species barriers. She had clearly traveled a great distance, her paws cracked and bleeding from the rough terrain. Jake's fellow Marines had warned him about getting attached to local animals. "They're everywhere out here," his buddy Mike had said. "Best not to get involved." But something about this mother dog's determination struck a chord deep within Jake's heart. She wasn't just another stray looking for food scraps. This was a mother on a mission. The dog stopped about 20 feet from where Jake stood, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him forget about dinner entirely. She gently placed her puppy on the ground and took a few tentative steps toward Jake, then looked back at her baby, then at Jake again. The message was clear as day, even without words. Other Marines had gathered around, curious about the commotion. "Looks like Mama's asking for help," observed Corporal Rodriguez, his voice softer than usual. The tough exterior that all soldiers wore like armor seemed to crack slightly in the presence of such raw, maternal love. Jake knelt down slowly, not wanting to frighten the already anxious mother. As he did, he could see that the puppy wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. The little one's tiny body lay still on the sandy ground, and Jake's heart sank. He had seen too much death in this place, too much suffering, but somehow the loss of this innocent life hit him differently. The mother dog whimpered softly, nudging her puppy with her nose, willing it to move, to breathe, to come back to her. When nothing happened, she looked up at Jake again, her eyes filled with a grief that needed no translation. In that moment, Jake realized he was witnessing something profound, a mother's love that had driven her to seek help from strangers, even potential enemies. "She came all this way," Jake whispered to himself, studying the dog's worn paws and exhausted posture. The nearest village was miles away across dangerous terrain. This brave mother had risked everything, carrying her dying child through hostile territory, holding on to hope that somehow, somewhere, someone might be able to help. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't save the puppy, but he could honor this mother's incredible journey. He could show her that her courage and love hadn't gone unnoticed. The other Marines watched in silence as Jake slowly extended his hand toward the grieving mother, speaking in gentle tones. "It's okay, girl. We see you. We understand." The dog's tail gave the faintest wag, and for the first time since her arrival, she seemed to relax just slightly. This was the beginning of an extraordinary bond between two souls who had both known loss. Both understood the price of love, and both were about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected friendships can heal the deepest wounds. The mother dog allowed Jake to approach slowly, her instincts telling her that this human was different from the others she had encountered. Jake's heart broke as he knelt beside the tiny puppy, confirming what he already knew. The little one had passed away, likely from dehydration and the extreme heat that plagued the region. "I'm so sorry, Mama," Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The dog seemed to understand his tone, if not his words, and she laid down beside her puppy, resting her head on her paws in a gesture of pure grief. Jake had never seen such raw sorrow from an animal, and it reminded him of his own mother's tears when his younger brother had been deployed to Iraq years earlier. Corporal Rodriguez disappeared and returned with a small cardboard box and an old blanket. "For the little one," he said simply, his usual tough demeanor completely absent. The Marines had all been changed by witnessing this mother's love, and without being asked, they began to help create a proper resting place for the puppy. Jake carefully lifted the tiny body, surprised by how light it felt in his hands. The mother dog watched his every movement, her eyes never leaving her baby. As Jake gently placed the puppy in the makeshift casket, the dog let out a low whimper that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "We'll take care of this properly," Jake promised, though he wasn't sure the dog understood. But something in his tone seemed to comfort her, and she moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the trust beginning to form in her tired eyes. The burial took place as the stars began to appear in the clear Afghan sky. Jake had found a peaceful spot behind the base, under a small cluster of rocks that would serve as a natural marker. The mother dog watched from a distance as Jake and 3 other Marines dug a small grave, their usual military efficiency replaced by careful, respectful movements. When it came time to lower the box into the ground, Jake looked at the mother dog. "Would you like to say goodbye?" he asked softly. As if she understood, the dog approached slowly and sniffed the box one final time. She then sat back and tilted her head toward the sky, releasing a mournful howl that echoed across the desert landscape. The sound sent chills down Jake's spine. It was a mother's lament, a song of grief that transcended all barriers between human and animal. The other Marines stood in respectful silence, many of them thinking of their own families back home, their own fears and losses. After the burial, Jake expected the dog to leave to return to wherever she had come from. Instead, she remained by the small grave, keeping a vigilant watch as if protecting her puppy even in death. Jake brought her water and some of his own meal rations, placing them within reach but giving her space to grieve. "What are you going to do with her?" asked Private Chen, one of the younger Marines who had been deeply affected by the evening's events. Jake looked at the loyal mother, who had now been lying by the grave for over 2 hours, and felt a familiar tug at his heart. "I don't know yet," Jake admitted. Military regulations were strict about animals on base, and he knew that keeping her could complicate things. But looking at this devoted mother who had risked everything to seek help for her child, Jake couldn't bear the thought of simply turning her away. As the night grew cooler, Jake noticed the dog beginning to shiver. Her thin frame provided little protection against the desert's dramatic temperature drop. Without thinking, he approached with a spare blanket, moving slowly so as not to startle her. To his surprise, she didn't move away when he draped the blanket over her shoulders. Instead, she looked up at him with those expressive dark eyes, and for the first time since her arrival, her tail wagged just slightly. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the connection that was beginning to form between them. That night, Jake found himself checking on the dog every hour during his watch duty. Each time she was in the same position, faithful guardian of her puppy's final resting place. By morning, Jake had made a decision that would challenge every regulation he had sworn to follow, but felt more right than anything he had done in months. Dawn broke over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Jake had barely slept, his mind occupied with thoughts of the grieving mother dog. When he checked on her at sunrise, he found her in the exact same spot, still maintaining her vigil over her puppy's grave. "Good morning, girl," Jake said softly as he approached with fresh water and food. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, and she raised her head to look at him. Her eyes seemed less wild than they had the day before, as if she was beginning to recognize him as a friend rather than a stranger. Jake sat down a few feet away from her, not wanting to intrude on her morning, but wanting her to know she wasn't alone. As he watched her, he noticed details he had missed in yesterday's chaos. She was actually quite beautiful beneath the dirt and matted fur, with intelligent eyes and a gentle face that spoke of kindness despite the hardships she had endured. "You know, you remind me of someone," Jake said conversationally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom had a dog when I was growing up. Her name was Bella, and she had the same loyal heart you do." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and she seemed to be listening intently. Major Harrison, the base commander, appeared around the corner during his morning rounds, stopping short when he saw Jake sitting with the dog. "Morrison, what's the situation here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of years in command but also a note of curiosity. Jake stood quickly, snapping to attention. "Sir, this dog arrived yesterday carrying her deceased puppy. She's been keeping watch over the burial site since last night." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Go ahead, Morrison. She's not just any stray dog, sir. What she did, traveling all this way to seek help for her baby, that takes something special. She deserves better than being turned away." Jake's voice was steady, but his conviction was unmistakable. Major Harrison studied the dog, who had now turned her attention to the two men but remained by her puppy's grave. The commander was a career military man, but he was also a father of 3 children back in Texas. The sight of such devoted maternal love, even from an animal, stirred something deep within him. Military regulations are clear about animals on base, Major Harrison said slowly, but his tone suggested he was wrestling with the decision. However, there are provisions for exceptional circumstances. He paused, watching as the dog gently placed a paw on the small mound of earth that marked her puppy's resting place. "What do you propose, Morrison?" Jake's heart raced. He hadn't expected the major to be open to discussion. "Sir, I'd like to take responsibility for her care. She could serve as a therapy animal for the troops. The men have already been affected by her story, and it's given them something positive to focus on instead of—" He gestured vaguely toward the hostile world beyond the base walls. The major nodded thoughtfully. He had noticed the change in morale after yesterday's events, the way the Marines had come together to help bury the puppy, the gentleness they had shown. In a place where death and violence were constant companions, acts of compassion became precious beyond measure. There would be conditions, Major Harrison said finally. She'd need to be healthy, vaccinated if possible, and she'd be your full responsibility. Any problems and she's gone. Understood? Yes, sir. Completely understood. And Morrison? She needs a name if she's going to be part of this outfit. Jake looked at the loyal mother, still keeping her faithful watch, and thought about her incredible journey, her determination to seek help even in the face of impossible odds. Hope, sir. Her name is Hope. The major smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from him in weeks. Hope it is. You have 24 hours to get her settled and assessed by the medic. Make it work, Morrison. As Major Harrison walked away, Jake turned back to Hope, who was watching him with what could only be described as understanding in her eyes. Well, girl, looks like you've got a new home. At least for now. Hope's tail wagged once, tentatively, as if she was afraid to believe that good things could still happen. Jake spent the rest of the morning sitting with Hope, talking to her about everything and nothing, letting her get used to his voice, his presence, his scent. Other Marines stopped by throughout the day, offering treats from their rations, sharing their own stories of pets back home, and marveling at the courage of this remarkable mother dog. By evening, Hope had eaten a full meal for the first time in days and had even moved a few feet away from the grave to drink water. It was a small step, but Jake recognized it as significant progress in her healing process. 3 weeks had passed since Hope's arrival at Forward Operating Base Thunder, and the transformation was remarkable. What had begun as a desperate mother's plea for help had evolved into something none of the Marines could have anticipated. Hope had become the heart and soul of their small military family. Doc Martinez, the base medic, had given Hope a clean bill of health after a thorough examination. She's malnourished and has some minor injuries, but nothing that good food and care won't fix, he had told Jake. This is one tough lady. Whatever she went through to get here, she's a survivor. Hope had gradually moved away from her puppy's grave, though she still visited it every morning and evening. Jake had built her a small shelter near his own quarters, using scraps of wood and metal he had found around the base. She seemed to understand that this was her new home, her new pack. The most remarkable change was in the Marines themselves. Hope had a gift for sensing who needed comfort most. When Private Chen received bad news from home about his grandmother's illness, Hope appeared at his side without being called, resting her head on his lap while he processed the difficult information. When Sergeant Williams was struggling with nightmares from a difficult patrol, Hope somehow knew to sleep outside his tent, her presence providing a comforting watchfulness that helped him rest. It's like she knows. Corporal Rodriguez observed one evening as they watched Hope approach a new arrival, who was clearly homesick and struggling with his first deployment. She's got some kind of sixth sense about who needs her most. Jake nodded, marveling at Hope's intuitive nature. Dogs are pack animals, he said. She's adopted all of us as her new family. She's protecting us the same way she tried to protect her puppy. The base psychiatrist, Dr. Sarah Coleman, who visited monthly to check on the mental health of the troops, was amazed by the change in morale. I've never seen anything like it, she told Major Harrison during her latest visit. The presence of this dog has reduced stress levels, improved sleep patterns, and created a sense of shared purpose among the men. She's doing more for their psychological well-being than months of counseling sessions could accomplish. Hope had also proven herself useful in practical ways. Her keen senses had alerted the Marines to approaching sandstorms before their equipment detected them, giving them valuable time to secure loose items and take cover. She had an uncanny ability to detect changes in the wind that preceded dust devils, earning her the nickname Weather Dog among some of the younger Marines. But it was her relationship with Jake that remained the most special. Every morning she would wake him with a gentle nudge of her nose, accompanying him on his early runs around the base perimeter. She had learned to stay clear of the obstacle course during training exercises, but would position herself where she could watch, her tail wagging with what looked suspiciously like pride as Jake completed his routines. In the evenings, Jake would sit with Hope and tell her about his life back home in Minnesota, about the lakes and forests that were so different from this desert landscape. He talked about his family, his dreams for when his deployment ended, his fears about returning to civilian life. Hope listened with the patience of a trained therapist, occasionally nuzzling his hand or resting her chin on his knee. "You know what's funny?" Jake said to her one night as they sat under the brilliant canopy of stars that was only visible in places far from city lights. "I came here feeling like I had lost my purpose, like nothing I did mattered anymore. But you've reminded me what it means to care for someone else, to be needed." Hope looked up at him with those expressive dark eyes, and Jake could swear she understood every word. She had filled a hole in his heart that he hadn't even realized was there, an emptiness that had been growing larger with each difficult day in this harsh place. The other Marines had noticed the change in Jake too. He smiled more often now, had regained the natural leadership qualities that had made him a sergeant in the first place. His letters home were filled with stories about Hope, and his family was amazed by the transformation they could hear in his voice during their weekly phone calls. "She saved me as much as I saved her," Jake confided to Major Harrison during one of their regular check-ins. Maybe more. The Major, who had initially been skeptical about allowing a dog on base, had become one of Hope's biggest supporters. He had even sent photographs of her to his own family, and his wife had started a care package program, sending dog toys and treats along with supplies for the Marines. As Jake watched Hope settle in for the night, curled up in the blanket he had given her that first evening, he felt a contentment he hadn't experienced in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new reminders of how far they were from home. But tonight they had each other, and somehow that made everything bearable. 6 months had passed since Hope's dramatic arrival, and life at Forward Operating Base Thunder had settled into a rhythm that none of the Marines wanted to see end. Hope had become so integrated into their daily operations that it was hard to remember what the base had been like without her cheerful presence and unwavering loyalty. But military deployments don't last forever, and Jake's tour of duty was approaching its end. The reality hit him like a punch to the gut when Major Harrison handed him his rotation orders during a routine briefing in early spring. He would be returning stateside in just 8 weeks. "Congratulations, Morrison," the Major said, though his expression was more somber than celebratory. "You've earned this. Time to go home to your family." Jake stared at the official papers, his mind racing. Home. He had been dreaming of Minnesota lakes and his mother's cooking for months, but now all he could think about was Hope. What would happen to her when he left? Who would take care of her? Who would understand her the way he did? That evening, Jake sat with Hope in their usual spot behind his quarters, the weight of the coming separation heavy on his heart. Hope seemed to sense his distress, pressing closer against his leg and looking up at him with concern in her dark eyes. "I have to go home, girl," Jake said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to leave you, but I don't have a choice." Hope tilted her head, studying his face with that incredible intuition she possessed. She might not understand the words, but she could feel the sadness radiating from her human companion. The next few days were torture for Jake. He threw himself into making arrangements for Hope's care after his departure, but every option felt inadequate. Corporal Rodriguez had volunteered to take over her care, and while Jake trusted him completely, it broke his heart to think of Hope wondering why he had abandoned her. "She'll be okay, Jake," Rodriguez assured him during one of their planning sessions. "The whole base loves her. We'll take good care of her until she can figure out what comes next." But Jake knew it wasn't that simple. Hope had bonded with him in a way that went beyond basic care and feeding. They had saved each other in this harsh place, had become family in the truest sense of the word. The thought of leaving her behind felt like a betrayal of everything they had shared. 2 weeks before his scheduled departure, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He requested a private meeting with Major Harrison, bringing with him a folder full of research he had been conducting in secret during his off-duty hours. "Sir, I'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing Hope home with me," Jake said, his heart pounding as he laid out his case. "I've been researching the process for military working dog adoption, and while Hope isn't technically a working dog, she has provided invaluable service to this unit." Major Harrison leaned back in his chair, surprised but not entirely shocked by the request. He had witnessed the bond between Jake and Hope, had seen how much they meant to each other. "Morrison, you know the complexities involved in international animal transport from a combat zone. The paperwork alone could take months, not to mention the cost." "I understand, sir. I've contacted several organizations that specialize in helping military personnel bring animals home from deployment. There's a group called Pups of War that has offered to help with the logistics and expenses." Jake's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he handed over the research he had compiled. The major studied the documents, impressed by Jake's thoroughness. There were veterinary requirements, transportation arrangements, quarantine procedures, and a maze of international regulations to navigate. "But it wasn't impossible. And if I approve this, you're prepared to take full responsibility for Hope for the rest of her life?" Major Harrison asked. "This isn't just about getting her out of Afghanistan. This is about making her part of your family permanently." Jake didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. She already is part of my family. I can't imagine my life without her now." The major was quiet for a long moment, weighing the precedent this would set, the complications it might create, the resources it would require. But he was also thinking about the positive impact Hope had made on his Marines, the healing she had brought to men who desperately needed it, the loyalty and love she had shown in return for simple kindness. "I'll make some calls," Major Harrison said finally. "No promises, Morrison, but I'll see what can be done. Hope has earned some consideration for her service to this unit." Jake left the meeting with a mixture of hope and terror. The possibility of bringing Hope home was everything he had dreamed of, but the fear of disappointment if it fell through was almost unbearable. He decided not to tell Hope about the possibility, not wanting to get her hopes up if his plans didn't work out. But Hope, with her uncanny ability to read human emotions, seemed to sense that something important was happening. She stayed even closer to Jake's side than usual, as if she could feel the approaching change and was determined to make the most of every moment they had together. Meanwhile, the wheels of military bureaucracy began to turn, and Jake could only wait and hope that love would find a way to overcome the obstacles that stood between Hope and her chance at a new life in America. The next 3 weeks were an emotional roller coaster for Jake as he waited for news about Hope's potential journey to America. Major Harrison had made his calls, and the response had been cautiously optimistic. The military brass understood the unique circumstances and were willing to work with the humanitarian organizations to make it happen, but the logistics remained daunting. Dr. Martinez had begun preparing Hope for the extensive veterinary examinations she would need to qualify for international transport. Blood tests, vaccinations, health certificates, and behavioral assessments were all required. Hope endured each procedure with remarkable patience, as if she somehow understood that this was all leading to something important. "She's in perfect health," Dr. Martinez reported after completing the final round of tests. "Whatever she went through before arriving here, she's made a full recovery. Physically, she's ready for travel whenever the paperwork clears." But it was Hope's emotional state that concerned Jake most. She had become increasingly clingy as his departure date approached, rarely leaving his side even when duty called. Other Marines had noticed her behavior change, commenting that she seemed anxious, constantly searching for Jake whenever he was out of sight. "She knows," observed Private Chen during one of their evening meals. "Dogs are smart that way. She can feel that something big is coming." Jake's own family had been following Hope's story through his letters and phone calls. His mother, Susan, had become particularly invested in the outcome. "That dog saved you, Jake," she had said during their last conversation. "If there's any way to bring her home, we'll make it work. Your father's already planning to fence in the backyard." The breakthrough came exactly 1 week before Jake's scheduled departure. Major Harrison called him into his office with a smile that Jake had rarely seen during his entire deployment. "Morrison, I have good news," the major announced. holding up a thick envelope of official documents. Hope's transport has been approved. She'll be flying out with you next week. Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. Sir, are you serious? It's really happening? It's really happening. Pups of War has arranged everything. She'll fly from here to Germany, then to Chicago, and finally to Minneapolis. The total journey will take about 36 hours, but she'll be accompanied by professional animal handlers the entire way. Jake could barely contain his emotions. After weeks of uncertainty, the impossible was becoming reality. Hope would be coming home with him, starting a new life in Minnesota, far from the harsh desert that had brought them together. That evening, Jake sat with Hope under their favorite spot beneath the stars, finally able to share his secret with her. Guess what, girl? We're going home together. You're going to love Minnesota. There are lakes and forests and snow in the winter. My mom is already planning to spoil you rotten. Hope looked up at him with those intelligent eyes, and her tail wagged with an enthusiasm Jake hadn't seen since her early days on the base. It was as if she understood that her life was about to change again, but this time for the better. The other Marines organized a farewell party for both Jake and Hope. Understanding that they were losing two members of their family, Corporal Rodriguez presented Hope with a new collar made from paracord, decorated with the unit's insignia. So she'll always remember where she came from, he explained. Private Chen had crafted a small wooden plaque that read, Hope Morrison, Honorary Marine, with the dates of her service at Forward Operating Base Thunder. For when she gets to her new home, he said, his voice tight with emotion. Even Major Harrison attended the informal ceremony, bringing with him official paperwork that designated Hope as a unit mascot emeritus, giving her a permanent place in the base's history. She may be leaving, he said, but her service to this unit will never be forgotten. The hardest part was watching Hope say goodbye to her puppy's grave one last time. Jake had worried that leaving this sacred spot would be too difficult for her, but Hope seemed to understand that it was time to move forward. She spent several quiet minutes by the small marker, then returned to Jake's side with a peaceful expression that suggested she was ready for whatever came next. On their final night in Afghanistan, Jake lay on his cot with Hope curled up beside him, both of them too excited to sleep. Tomorrow we start our new adventure together, Jake whispered into the darkness. I promise you, girl, you'll never have to worry about being alone again. We're family now for life. Hope responded by placing her paw on Jake's arm, a gesture that had become their special way of saying I understand and I love you too. As Jake drifted off to sleep, he marveled at how much his life had changed since that day when a desperate mother dog had approached him, carrying her dying puppy. He had come to Afghanistan as a soldier doing his duty, but he was leaving as a man who had learned the true meaning of unconditional love and second chances. The journey home was about to begin, and for the first time in months, Jake felt nothing but excitement for the future that awaited them both. The Minneapolis airport buzzed with typical activity on a crisp October morning, but for Jake Morrison, time seemed to stand still as he waited in the international arrivals area. After 36 hours of travel and countless prayers, Hope was finally arriving on American soil. His parents stood beside him, equally nervous and excited to meet the dog who had become such an important part of their son's life. Flight 4047 from Chicago has arrived, announced the gate agent, and Jake's heart began to race. Hope had made the journey from Afghanistan to Germany without incident, but the final leg from Chicago had been delayed by weather, adding 2 extra hours of worry to an already stressful day. Susan Morrison squeezed her son's arm reassuringly. She's going to be fine, honey. That dog has already survived more than most animals ever face. A little airplane ride isn't going to stop her now. 20 minutes later, Jake spotted the distinctive uniform of the professional animal transport handler emerging from the secure area, followed by a wheeled crate that contained his most precious cargo. Through the mesh door, he could see Hope's familiar golden-brown face, her eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of confusion and hope. Hope, Jake called out, and immediately the dog's ears perked up. Her tail began wagging furiously as she recognized the voice she had been missing for the past day and a half. The transport handler, a kind woman named Maria who specialized in military animal relocations, smiled at the reunion she was witnessing. She's been a perfect traveler, Maria reported as she began the process of releasing Hope from her travel crate. A little anxious at first, but she seemed to understand that this was a journey to somewhere good. She's been eating well and responding beautifully to everyone who's cared for her along the way. The moment Hope was released from the crate, she launched herself into Jake's arms with a joy that brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching. She covered his face with kisses, her whole body wiggling with excitement as she pressed against him, reassuring herself that he was real, that they were finally together again. "I missed you too, girl," Jake whispered into her fur, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. "Welcome to America. Welcome home." Hope then turned her attention to Jake's parents, approaching them with the careful politeness she had learned around strangers, but warming quickly to their gentle voices and welcoming gestures. Susan Morrison knelt down and allowed Hope to sniff her hand before gently stroking her head. "She's even more beautiful than in your pictures," Susan said, marveling at Hope's intelligent eyes and gentle demeanor. "Hello, sweet girl. We've heard so much about you." The drive to Jake's childhood home in a quiet suburb outside Minneapolis was an adventure for Hope, who had never seen landscapes like the ones rolling past the car window. Lakes dotted with colorful fall foliage, suburban neighborhoods with manicured lawns, children playing in parks. It was a world away from the harsh desert environment she had known for the first part of her life. Jake's father, Robert, had indeed fenced in the backyard and had even installed a dog door leading to a small heated area in the garage. "Figured she might need time to adjust to Minnesota winters," he explained with the practical kindness that Jake remembered from his childhood. Hope's first few days in her new home were a mixture of wonder and cautious exploration. Everything was different here: the sounds, the smells, the comfortable furniture that she was actually allowed to lie on. Jake had taken 2 weeks of leave to help her adjust, and they spent their days exploring the neighborhood, visiting nearby lakes, and establishing new routines. The local veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Williams, was amazed by Hope's story when Jake brought her in for her first American checkup. "She's in remarkable condition for everything she's been through," Dr. Williams observed. "You can see the intelligence in her eyes, the resilience. This is a very special dog." Hope's integration into civilian life progressed beautifully. She learned to navigate stairs, discovered the joy of soft carpets and warm beds, and developed an absolute love for the fireplace in the Morrison family living room. But perhaps most importantly, she learned to trust in permanence again, to believe that this comfortable life was really hers to keep. Jake enrolled in college to complete his degree, and Hope became his constant study companion, often lying at his feet as he worked on assignments about international relations and conflict resolution. His professors were intrigued by his unique perspective, shaped by his military service and his relationship with a dog who had bridged the gap between two very different worlds. Hope also began working as a therapy dog at the local Veterans Affairs Hospital, where her natural ability to comfort those in distress proved invaluable. Veterans dealing with PTSD, depression, and adjustment difficulties found solace in her calm presence and intuitive understanding of their struggles. She seemed to remember her own journey from trauma to healing, and she used that experience to help others find their way back to hope. "She has a gift," observed Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the staff psychologist who worked with Hope during therapy sessions. "Some dogs are trained to do this work, but Hope has a natural instinct for it. She knows exactly who needs her most on any given day." One particularly meaningful moment came when Hope was visiting a veteran named Tom, who had lost both legs in an IED explosion and was struggling with severe depression. Tom had been resistant to all forms of therapy, barely speaking to the medical staff or his family. But when Hope approached his wheelchair and gently placed her head on his lap, something shifted. "She understands," Tom whispered, the first words he had spoken in weeks. "She knows what it's like to lose everything and have to start over." From that day forward, Tom began participating in his therapy sessions, and Hope became a regular part of his recovery process. Jake often accompanied Hope to the hospital, sharing their story with other veterans who were struggling with their own transitions back to civilian life. The tale of a Marine and a stray dog finding each other in the midst of war became a powerful symbol of resilience and the healing power of unconditional love. 2 years after their return to America, Jake proposed to his college girlfriend, Sarah, in the same park where he and Hope took their morning runs. Hope wore a special collar with the engagement ring attached, and when Sarah said yes, Hope's excited barking could be heard throughout the neighborhood. The wedding was a beautiful affair, and Hope served as the ring bearer, walking down the aisle with the confidence of a dog who knew she was loved and valued. Many of Jake's Marine buddies attended the ceremony, including Corporal Rodriguez and Private Chen, who had flown in specifically to see Hope and celebrate Jake's happiness. During the reception, Major Harrison, now retired, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "I've seen a lot of unlikely friendships in my military career," he said, "but none more powerful than the bond between Jake and Hope. They remind us that sometimes the most important battles we fight aren't against enemies, but against despair, loneliness, and the feeling that we don't matter. They saved each other, and in doing so, they've saved countless others." As Jake and Sarah settled into married life, Hope adapted to her expanded family with her characteristic grace. She appointed herself as protector of the household, greeting visitors with friendly but watchful attention, always ensuring that her people were safe and happy. 5 years after that fateful day in Afghanistan, Jake graduated from college and began working for a non-profit organization that helped military working dogs transition to civilian life. Hope often accompanied him to work, serving as both an inspiration and a living example of successful rehabilitation. Their story had come full circle. The desperate mother dog who had once carried her dying puppy across dangerous terrain seeking help had become the helper, using her own experience of loss and recovery to assist others on their healing journeys. She had found not just a home, but a purpose that honored both her past struggles and her present joy. Every evening, as Jake and Hope sat together on their back porch watching the sunset over the Minnesota lakes, Jake was reminded of how much their lives had changed since that first meeting in the Afghan desert. Hope was no longer the thin, desperate stray who had appeared at his base. She was a confident, beloved family member whose gentle wisdom touched everyone she met. "You know what, girl?" Jake would often say, scratching behind her ears as she rested her head on his lap. "You taught me that sometimes the best way to heal your own heart is to help heal someone else's." Hope would look up at him with those same intelligent dark eyes that had first captured his attention, her tail wagging gently, and Jake knew that she understood. Their journey together had begun with tragedy, but it had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of compassion, the resilience of the spirit, and the truth that love can indeed conquer all.